Nurturing emotional intelligence in children is a vital aspect of fostering their overall well being and social development. This process involves helping children understand, express, and manage their own emotions effectively. By nurturing emotional intelligence, we empower children to navigate the complexities of their feelings and relationships, equipping them with essential life skills for a brighter and more emotionally aware future. A very warm welcome to the show, Season 9 of EI Cafe with Azim. And I'm your host, Azim Sahib, a human capital specialist, Lego Series Play Facilitator, ICF certified PCS level coach, and emotional intelligence and emotional culture tech practitioner. I am one of the lead facilitators for Luminary Learning Solutions. You heard the topic. Today we are going to talk about children and how we are going to equip them with emotional intelligence on this particular episode. To have this conversation, I have one of my connections all the way from UK. Let me introduce her. She founded Educating Matters in 2001, drawing on her experience as a primary school teacher and everyday experience of being an imperfect mother of 4 children aged 22 to 13. She has worked with organizations globally across a vast range of sectors and has supported tens and thousands of working parents on all aspects of relating to educating, raising children, and integrating work and family. She also speaks in schools and has an online parenting course. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Rachel Vecht, founder, Educating Matters.
Thank you so much for having
me. Rachel, officially welcoming you to the cafe.
Good to be here.
Right. So, Rachel, thank you very much. I know we have been trying to get hold for some time. Here we are. I've got you. And I make sure that in one of my seasons, I really cover the parenting and the children part, because that's more important, very much important, because those are the future prospect who's going to come to the corporate world, want to become an entrepreneur. So on that note, Rachel, I really understood, and I'm a parent as well. I really understand how important this particular component of, like, as a parent, how can we nurture that element of emotional intelligence with the children? So on that note, what role do parents play in nurturing emotional intelligence in children? And why do you think it's important, especially in this particular era? I think it's something really unique we are going through. What is your thought? Let's start with that question.
Okay, so first of all, the reason I moved from teaching children to working parents is I realized as a teacher that most of the learning actually happens outside the classroom. And I always say that parents are a child's first and most important teacher, and about 80% of parenting is modeling. So how we show up, how we manage our emotions, how we model self-regulation is going to have a crucial impact on our children. And helping our children to understand and manage their emotions is literally the foundation of every healthy and fulfilling relationship they have in their personal and professional lives. Now, one of my favorite, I don't know if you've come across the work of John Gottman, but his book, Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child, is probably one of my favorites on this topic. And he says in this book that the key to successful parenting is not found in complicated rules and theories, but it is based on empathy and understanding. So he says that the heart of parenting is being there in a particular way when it really counts. And what our children need from us, more than anything, is to feel heard and understood. That doesn't matter if you have a toddler or a teenager or an adult or anything in between. And in fact, the same applies to all relationships, not just between parent and child. So our job is to help our children to understand all feelings are okay. They're part of being human. And what we can teach them is how to manage them, how to act rather than react, how to problem solve, And we are almost like an emotional container vessel as parents. We are a witness to those feelings. And if we don't address them, they're going to show up somewhere else in a different behavior. So the way we interact and respond to our children when they're upset, this is going to affect their brain development and the kind of people that they become. And it can shape their attitude to emotions for the rest of their lives. So it's a serious job that we have.
It's very serious, Rachel. Now, you mentioned that it's how a parent show up to a child, right? One of the challenge we have, because I've been really talking to a lot of corporates and coaches, and been talking a lot of them in part of well-being and emotional intelligence, being aware. One of the challenges is when people come after work, they straight come with lot of baggages in their mind, and like a lot of stress and tiredness. In that particular component, how parents need to be aware. How can we really bring that awareness to the parent? Like, I'm coming home, children are waiting for me. How do you react? Because sometimes we might react. What do you think about that? How can really work on that particular area as a parent?
I mean, I think there's something called like rupture and repair. So when everyone, I've read hundreds of books of parenting. I've spent 30 years talking about parenting. Doesn't mean that I never lose my cool. Like, the hardest thing is to stay calm. And you're quite right. What I always say to parents is very often it has nothing to do, your reaction has nothing to do with your child and what they're doing, but it's more about how you're feeling and where you are. So if you're really tired, if you're very overwhelmed at work, if you're, very anxious about something else that's got nothing to do with your kids, you will react. And it's very important to model for our children that when we've got things wrong and maybe you kind of lost it with them and, got upset or started threatening certain things, or, that we also, after we've calmed down, we explain to them like that we're sorry and this is why it's happened. And that's why even with really, really young children, what I like to try to explain to them is how emotions work. And that is not an easy thing to understand. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie Inside Out, but Inside Out is a Disney Pixar movie. See this child with her 4 different emotions. So that's a really good way to explain it to young children. But what I like them to know is that there is, we have this part of our brain, our amygdala. And when we feel sad or angry or embarrassed or frustrated or whatever it is, it takes over and it puts us into kind of fight, flight or freeze mode. And I remember, like, one of my kids, my youngest, used to get really angry and upset and sometimes quite aggressive. And when she was calm, I actually sat down with her and I explained what was going on in her brain. I don't know if you've ever seen so Dr. Dan Siegel, he's written some great books, Inside Out Parenting, The Whole Brain Child. He actually has a hand model of the brain that he teaches young children, and you can like look it up on YouTube, Dr. Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain, so that kids even only 5 or 6 years old can actually understand why they flip their lids, because their thinking part of their brain has just shut down, and it's that kind of emotional part that comes out. Another way I love to explain it, and this book was only around for my youngest child. Have you heard of Professor Steve Peters? So he wrote a book called The Paradox, but he wrote this one for kids called My Hidden Chimp. And he described the amygdala as a chimp that's firing off. And so kids can understand when they get like really angry or upset or they react, that is actually their chimp, their amygdala, like getting cross and making them do things that they wouldn't do if they were calm. So that then the child doesn't have to feel wrong or bad. They can just have that understanding of why they react the way they do.
Fantastic. So what I'm understanding is the resources, what you're saying is more have been developed for children to read and understand the whole process. We as being parents need to be more aware that ability to explain their language, this is what happening when you become this, and this happened to us as parent, and it can happen to them also. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you led me to an important next questions, Rachel, right? You mentioned from like being a toddler to being a teenager, and it's a different way of growing, right? Me and you have also gone through this. Now, how can we help children to really understand their emotions? Because teenagers, yes, sometimes they show like very aggressively, because that's the how the hormones works and because environment. But from toddler to a baby to getting into a mid high school level, how can we help children to really understand the emotion?
Yeah, well, that's what I was just, explaining before, that they understand where that emotion is coming from, and that their kind of thinking part of the brain shuts down. Like if you talk about toddlers, the prefrontal cortex is kind of like responsible for your executive functioning skills, planning, reasoning, thinking about the consequences of your actions. So in toddlers, that's actually not fully developed, which is why they find it so difficult to self-regulate, and they kind of go from 0 to 100 in 1 second if they want the pink cup and you've given them an orange one. And actually, because neurological scans have developed so much in the last 20-25 years, you mentioned hormones, but a lot of the explanation for teenage behavior is they've now discovered that during the teenage years, the prefrontal cortex goes through a major period of rewiring. So if you look at your teenager and you think, this is quite similar to like a toddler tantrum, it actually is. They're replicating because that rewiring is going on, and their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until they're in their mid-20s. So also for parents understanding this, and I would say for children, whatever age they are, that they understand why they react the way they do. And this whole thing about their amygdala is there to protect them in those moments, so they don't feel bad, but they understand this is something I need to kind of navigate and not allow it to control me.
That's interesting. Let's go on a practical. I think, Rachel, you have gone through this also, right? Let's say we have around a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old child, if we're taking to the shopping mall. We have been saying, "Mommy, I want this, I want this." And we have seen a lot of videos like how parents come and really calm the children, let the children really. Now, in this particular situation, I think every parents go through this particular process. How do you think we should really manage where the emotional intelligence piece will come across?
Okay, so a really important thing to help parents, grandparents, teachers, anyone, because I used to train teachers as well who struggle with this. So all behavior, and this all applies to adults as well, all behavior has a reason behind it, a valid reason. And our job as parents or adults is to be a bit like a detective, to slow down and think, what is my child trying to communicate? And the best way I can explain this is if you think of the analogy of an iceberg. So the tip of the iceberg is what you see, what you just described, the child at the petrol station and wanting to buy a bar of chocolate and the parent says no, or, in a shop and asking for things, whatever it is. Now, the behavior, they're getting upset, they're fighting with their sibling, they're slamming doors, they're ignoring you. That is what we tend to react to. But that is the tip of the iceberg. Now, underneath is the emotions and the feelings that are driving that behavior. And if we only address the behavior, we're actually pouring petrol on the fire. Our only job in that moment of meltdown, and by the way, the same thing applies to your partners, your work colleagues, your friends, your own parents, is to just focus on getting that person back to feeling neutral. And if you start saying, why are you behaving like that? What are you doing? Asking questions, they cannot actually process what you're saying in that moment, because they've been swamped by their amygdala. So in that moment of meltdown, the behavior is secondary. That is your clue to know something is going on with your child's emotional state. Are they, hungry, tired? Is there something going on at school? Is it attention? Is it a developmental need? Is it just their natural temperament? So they're very sensitive. And in that moment, the best thing you can do, sometimes it's called active listening, reflective listening, emotion coaching. It's got lots of different names, but what it is basically is just going back to what you said about staying calm yourself. We have mirror neurons, which means when our child has a meltdown, we sometimes also have a meltdown, especially, if it's in the school playground, if it's in front of grandparents, or like, oh my gosh, how's your child behaving? When it's in front of other people. So you, as the adult, you are modeling staying calm. My favorite mantra for this comes from a psychologist called Dr. Laura Markham. Stop, drop, and breathe. In that moment, just stop. Stop talking. Just pause. Drop all your own thoughts and assumptions and, parents catastrophize into the future, and just breathe. And by breathing, you are sending kind of a signal to your own parasympathetic nervous system to calm down. Then you observe your child, you listen to what they're saying, their body language, their facial expression. And that is where you just empathize. You might nod your head, you might put your hands on their back, and then you try and put into words what it is you think they're feeling. Even just stating, I see that your arms are crossed and you're biting your lip. Or maybe it feels like people are telling you what to do all day long and you just want to say what happens. Or you really don't want to stop going up and down that slide and you don't want to leave the park. You're basically saying, I get it. You're not saying, I agree with you. You're not being permissive. You're not saying, do whatever you want. You are just validating their emotions and being in tune with their feelings. Like it's empathy, compassion, understanding. Then when they're back to being calm and neutral, and it might be later that day, it might be the next day, then you address their behavior, but never in the moment. Otherwise, you just get literally an explosion.
Yeah. So, Rachel, what you just shared, I guess, how do you navigate when a meltdown, happens in any, not in a shopping mall, just an example, like any moment, the process should be, what if the child is really making a trouble and parents like you can't bear it anymore. You just go and like, all right, here you go. I get it for you. Now calm down. Is that a right approach to navigate this meltdown?
Let me ask you, if you've ever been like really, really upset or frustrated by something and someone tells you to calm down, it probably winds you up even more, right? So you've just got to provide that space. And sometimes less is more. And you might think, I don't have time for this. It's so inconvenient. I need you to get in the car seat and I've got to go to work and whatever. But just letting them know that you can never be wrong for having a feeling, especially with young children, trying to put into words what that feeling is. So Dan Siegel talks about this phrase, name it to tame it. And he has kind of linked children up as they're experiencing that emotion to a brain scan. And the very act of naming an emotion as a person is experiencing it has an immediate calming effect on their nervous system. All you're trying to do in that moment is connect. And if it's saying, I'm just going to sit here at the corner of the room and I'm here if you need me, because especially young kids, they can get like really violent, kicking, biting, So it's like, when you need me, I'm here for you. That's kind of like the way of framing it, like allowing that emotion to come out. And it can be time consuming and annoying and inconvenient.
Yeah, the part you said, the time consuming, is the biggest constraint I think every parent has, because you might be going on the way to work, dropping the kids school or picking them up, and you're running for a meeting. You never know, how it works. Now, Rachel, my next question would be like, what are the benefits of like acknowledging our children's feelings? Now, why I'm saying this is there might be listeners and viewers who are going to like listen and watch for this. Might be parents. Going to be a parent. You never know. Need to understand that how do they really recognize this is one challenge parents as have, especially a new parent, right? If you have one or two kids, like you have four kids now, you know the patterns, and even those are different. But then again, a new parent acknowledging their child's feelings is important. How to do that, and what are the benefits do you think parents can really reap out of it?
Okay, so first of all, it shows your child that you actually care. Because sometimes we say to our kids, oh no, it's not, don't be upset, or it's not that bad, and all of this. And we're doing that because we want to make the problem go away. But then the child's like got two problems. I'm upset, and now my parent is giving me the impression I shouldn't feel like that. And often children misbehave to communicate they're upset. But when you show that you get it and you understand, they feel heard, which actually ends up often reducing the need for that misbehavior. Another thing is that handling feelings constructively will help your child cope better the next time something happens. So that builds their resilience, it boosts their self-esteem. They feel validated and respected. You're also giving your children, especially young children, the vocabulary to express their feelings. So a child can name a book or a car, but being able to understand the language of emotions, like what it means to feel frustrated or embarrassed, that's difficult. So by using that language, they start to understand what it means. It also helps our kids to problem solve, because once they've kind of calmed down, we can help them find the way to like a solution. And also it kind of shifts the parent's attitude and response. Just taking that moment to pause and think, what is under the surface of that iceberg? That helps you to feel calmer as well, to be more responsive and empathetic towards your child. And everything I teach, I have a whole online parenting course. The foundation of everything, it's that relationship and connection. If you focus on only one thing, your relationship and your connection with your child is how you really have that long-term influence on them.
All right. I think you're triggering me to ask another important question, right? When you say connection. Now, Rachel, what we have been, many parents have been talking, of course, the devices, the social media, the social connection has led to I don't know how to really describe. Is it a big challenge or a big barrier for parents to really connect or something like that? The teenagers, they have been really exposed to social media and the other platforms. The connection has been really disconnected with the parenting. And when parents are really busy, like when you go to the dining table, everybody on the phone, etc. On this particular note, how important for parent, and how do you really explain this to a teenager? Because toddler and a baby and 4-year-old, 5-year-old, it's a different story. But in a teenager, it's totally different story, Rachel. Like, how do you really deal with this side of patterns?
Yeah, I mean, the connection piece is really important for all ages, but especially once your kids have devices and parents have devices, like you end up, I mean, it's a problem for all relationships, I think, with partners as well, that you kind of sit in bed at night on your phone and you actually don't speak to each other. So like all my kids, some of them are adults now, but they're all old enough to have their own phones and laptops and iPads and everything else. So we have certain rules around screen time for the whole family. So if we're having a family meal together, we have no phones. If we are in the car, like a few years ago, we drove around Europe, or even if I'm just dropping my child off somewhere 10 minutes away, we have a rule of no phones in the car, because often that's when you might have conversations, sitting side by side, making sure you spend, like, even if it's just 10 or 15 minutes of one-to-one time with each child. Parents complain a lot that their children are always on screens, but if you ask children, they'll say every time I try and child to my parent, they're just like this. So we have to consciously kind of put them down. And work and family have become so integrated because many of us are working from home and it's all like merged together. So you have to be very, very conscious about having that in life, real face-to-face social connection.
So here's another one. I think bullying. All right, we talk about workplace bullying, but now I'm going to talk about schools and any other society or community. When a child get into that particular level and get bullied by someone, right, for something, how does parents need to really respond to that? How do we recognize it? How to have that conversation? What do you think?
Okay, so this is a brilliant question. So the beauty of raising an emotionally intelligent child is it increases their understanding of how other people tick. So my youngest child, I would say, is the most emotionally intelligent of all my 4 kids. It's not a secret. I've told her, my other kids know. Last November, actually, she was subject to some bullying at school. But she knows, because I've taught her about her own emotions, that behind all behavior, there is something underneath. So even when she looked at this boy who was being so unkind and bullying and really horrible, and she was coming home from school crying, she said to me, "Mommy, I know it's not about me. It's about him. He's got something that's upsetting me, him, and he's using that to get upset with me." And she was very, very determined that she didn't want me to give her the solution. She didn't want me to go into school and complain about this child. She said, "I need to show him that I am strong enough, and I'm not going to take it." And she kind of got under the surface and basically said to him, "I wonder if something is going on with you that's upsetting you, that you need to treat me like this." And maybe it was amazing how she dealt with that. And by the end of 3 weeks of crying and saying she didn't want to go to school, she came home one Friday and she said, "Mum, I feel really strong." So I said, "Why?" She's like, "Because I learned how to deal with it." She actually wants to be a clinical psychologist. She's already decided. But I think honestly, sharing this book with her when she was 5 years old and helping her understand, why people react was massively important in having that resilience and knowing it's actually not about the behavior, it's about what's going on underneath. So it was like a perfect way of explaining why it's so important to teach this to children.
Because I asked that question, Rachel, because when children come and tell that at home, yes, parents are really quick to react and start taking the phone and really giving a call to their parents. Or I think it's more than to make them understand, look, this is how you navigate, this is what it is, that explanation. Rachel, quick one, right, before I go to the last one, because we're coming to the latter part of the conversation now. I had one of the conversation with one of my colleague on this particular, and they trade and she has a teenager, right? Now, certain conversation does not happen with the parents, right? And this child is a teenager. They have been talking about, for example, just being open, talking about being raped, being sexually abused. Now, she was coming and saying, "Azim, now I don't know what to do. How can I explain her this? This is not." I said, "You have to be true enough. You have to be open enough." Now, how do you really manage this sort of a conversation? Because this might end up in a trauma latter part of life, right? How do you really manage this sort of a conversation, and how EI can be a part of this?
Now, this is why the openness and the communication is so important, because if you totally overreact about something when your child is 4, or you dismiss them and say, "Oh, don't be silly, it's fine," over time they learn my parent actually doesn't really listen to me, so if I have a problem, that's not who I'm going to speak to. Now, every child, I can guarantee, whether you like it or not, at some point is going to mess up somehow. And we want our kids to know, I've tried to raise my kids, and I don't get this right all the time, but I want them to know that they can always speak to me about anything, however difficult, embarrassing, whatever mess they've got into, because I'm always going to be the one that's kind of got their back and have that life experience to be able to support them if they go to a friend or someone that's maybe not giving them the best advice. So it's really important to always show your kids that you're listening and you're not just jumping in with solutions, or you're asking them, what help do you need from me? how like with this bullying thing, I didn't tell my child what to do. I said, well, you could do this or you could do that, or how do you want to deal with this situation? So letting them feel empowered, but teaching them how to think for themselves and how to problem solve. And it starts with not overreacting when they tell you something. And if they say or ask you a question you don't know how to deal with, there is nothing wrong with saying, this is really, really important. And I want to just take a bit of time to think about the best thing to do or the best way to answer you, or I want to speak to your dad or your teacher or whatever, and I'm going to come back to you on this. So don't feel put on the spot if you're like, oh, like the first time my son told me that someone at school showed him pornography and he was only 11 years old. That was a very difficult conversation for a mum to have with a son. And I knew that if I overreact and was like, right, I'm calling the school, this is disgraceful, then they just think, I can't come and talk to you. So it goes back to like, take deep breaths and just stay calm and say, you know what? I need a minute. I need a few minutes to think about this and I'm going to come back to you.
Wow. So boils down to communication, and building that relationship is important. So we are aware about ourselves and we do understand our children's emotions as well. And being open is something you are recommending for parents to be open, have that constant conversations around those emotions and feelings, which can really navigate when a meltdown happens. So, Rachel, I think we are coming to our end of our conversation. Final question for you. Can you share some practical tools to support our children with self-regulation?
Yeah, so a lot of these same tools apply to adults and how you can stay calm. There's lots of things you can do. First of all is teaching your child about breathing, okay? Because we know that when you change the pattern of your breath, it helps you calm down. So maybe it's blowing a feather across the table or lying on the floor and putting like a teddy on the stomach and watching, you know, it go up and down. Talking about emotions. So if you watch a movie, if you read a book, if you see a child crying in the street, to say, you know, why do you think that child might be upset? So they're used to really discussing emotions. Talking about when they've calmed down, if they got really angry, like, where did you feel that emotion? Was it in your shoulders? Did you feel a tightness in your stomach? So they can begin to also recognize the physical signs before they explode. You can have things like, you know, a worry box where when a thought comes into their mind, they write it down on a piece of paper, and then you go back to it a few days later and you realize that thought or that emotion has passed. You've got things like teaching them visualization. You can have the journal. They can use music or doing something physical, or even like a hug gives that release of oxytocin, the feel-good hormone. Fidget toys, positive self-talk, things like meditation and mindfulness for kids is amazing. So there's lots of different, you know, if you've got a teenager feeling really overwhelmed, like how can we break this down into manageable chunks? So teaching them these very practical tools, which is actually what adults use as well. But if they know how to use them when they're young, that's going to help them as they get older.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I think there are a lot of takeaways from this particular episode. My key takeaway is have that friendly conversation. Let be open and don't panic. Calm yourself down. And I think that will do the rest of the work. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the time what we have for today. Today's conversation is about how do you nurture emotional intelligence within our children's mindset, and how do you have that conversation? How do you recognize? I think Rachel gave some plenty of key takeaways for our viewers and listeners. So Rachel, thank you very much for being an amazing guest for today and sharing your insights and experience, especially practical experience, and you have gone through amazing. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, you can get connected to Rachel on her social media platform. She's very active on LinkedIn, and of course, if you want to get more insight and what sort of work she does, log on to www.educatingmatters.co.uk. So you have a lot of for parenting and children, etc., etc. So log on today. On that note, Rachel, once again, thank you very much for being in the cafe and sharing your experience.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this podcast of EI Cafe with Azim. We sure do hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, please do reach out. If you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the show that is available on all major podcast platforms so you're notified when a new episode is posted. Please rate, review, and leave a comment and share it with your friends. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you're leaving with some great insights that can help you in your daily life. Follow Azim on social media and do write to us on topics and experts you'd like to hear from, and we will try to get them on board. Goodbye for now, until we meet again on another episode of EI Cafe with Azim.